Make no mistake, I know what I've started by lighting the fuse on this gasoline-drenched question. I'm more than certain that some of you are already staring daggers at me while the rest are eagerly anticipating my disappointment directed at the Chainsaw Man anime. While we could spend hours, no, more like days, talking about the quality of the Chainsaw Man anime and reaching some semblance of a conclusion, I'm here to tell you that today, that's not going to be the case. I think this question poses a smooth introduction to the topic of our video for today. It's not an easy pill to swallow, as our love and adoration for Tatsuki Fujimoto's stellar work may blind us. Understanding what went wrong, or rather what changed in the Chainsaw Man anime when adapted from the manga, is essential to our question. Keep this question logged somewhere in the back of your mind, but be mindful of making space for my listeners. We're not going to just file point after point of an argument, rather we're going to try to build a case. But before we continue on our finer details, I'd like to set a few ground rules and inform you of certain points that are critical to us. My name is Lanza. One could say I'll be your guide for today. I create video essays and episode breakdowns. If this is your first time visiting the channel, then consider subscribing. I'd love to have a new viewer join me. If you're a returning viewer, then welcome back. Thank you for coming back and joining me for another sit down. I greatly appreciate all of you. As with any other content creator, our beliefs and biases will bleed into the final product of the subject matter. I can't, in good faith, give you a rose-tinted interpretation on the Chainsaw Man anime adaptation and how I felt towards it. I believe that being forthcoming with my own opinions will allow you to come to a rational conclusion on my analysis and overall strength of my case. So our first initial question, to allow some transparency, is how did I feel about the Chainsaw Man anime? I love Chainsaw Man, and I love Tatsuki Fujimoto even more. Writing and creating fictional worlds to immerse ourselves in has always been a hobby of mine. No, not daydreaming of an alternate reality, but truly creating a piece of fiction so that others may enjoy. Fujimoto's drive, I suspect, has always been to provide entertainment for others, at times being extremely on the nose about it. I had the pleasure of reading his more famous one-shots and eventually stumbled my way upon his collection series, where I could see the same madness poured into Chainsaw Man. I think the first time I read Chainsaw Man, I finished it in about a single day. The only other series I've stayed up for and read to completion through an entire day were Goodnight Pun Pun and Orange. Chainsaw Man is special. It's unique. It's not just in the storytelling, but the style, the flavor of what the manga provides. Going into the anime, I knew I wasn't going to get the same experience from reading the manga, but ultimately, that's okay. I know that the initial question I posed to you may give off the impression that I disliked the anime. After all, I believe that the majority of watchers rather warmed up to the anime, so seeing an association between the words Chainsaw Man and bad will prompt some to put up their guard. However, I have nothing but praise for the anime. I thoroughly enjoyed it. In fact, I enjoyed it so much that I've actually rewatched the 12 episodes 3 times over. The first time I watched it was when it initially debuted in the fall of 2022 with a group of friends. At the time, the episodes we watched were in the English subbed, Japanese dubbed. The second time I watched the anime again was alongside my father around a few weeks later. Interestingly enough, I watched the Chainsaw Man anime in Spanish dubbing. The third time I watched Chainsaw Man was alone, specifically during the nighttime after a long day's work. I watched the anime in its English dubbing. You may be wondering, what's the point of highlighting the different languages? Well, it's within the various languages that I found quite an interesting fact. Of all 3 languages that I listened to, I can say without a shadow of a doubt within my mind that the Spanish dubbing of Chainsaw Man is the superior form of watching this specific anime. The little mannerisms within the voice acting and added flavors take the anime one step above and achieve a very rare state of peak perfection. Anime has such a difficult hurdle in which it must please those who are unaware of the source material manga and appease those who have already read it and expect an adaptation to reignite that same fire that made one fall in love with the manga. Chainsaw Man, the anime, is an adaptation that hits particular highs and manages to remain at a consistent level of entertainment. I never once during these 3 watch-throughs felt that watching the Chainsaw Man anime felt like a chore. Even now, as we embark on dissecting the curiosities of this anime, I implore you all to watch it yourself. Go beyond and take a read through the manga, as I'm sure you'll find yourself cozying up to Fujimoto's madness. Now, I want to dispel some current assumptions on what exactly we're going to be doing here today. This video won't be an episode analysis or series retrospective. No, I won't be talking about the Fight Club theory or fake Sawman theories, as those seem to be two of the same major conspiracies I always see running around the community. Instead, this video will take a look and inspect the directing and tone of the first season. To reach our overall main question of whether Chainsaw Man is cinematic, we need to cover various points associated with the anime and manga that will provide critical pieces of evidence for our final argument. This is your official warning on behalf of myself. I'll touch on several future plot beats within the world of Chainsaw Man and other Fujimoto works in general. Now that you've been sufficiently warned, I can now show you the general layout of my argument. The first point will explain the background of the Chainsaw Man anime debut during the fall of 2022. As in any case, context matters. The background of an event can lead us to certain assumptions. Understanding the context of the fall season will allow us to understand the anime ecosystem at the time of debut and why the Chainsaw Man anime wasn't a complete sweep, the eventual rise of negative opinion towards it, and the brief clash it had against its quote-unquote rival of the season. The second and third points of this video will focus on testimony. The second point in particular will focus on testimony in the form of 2 interviews given by the Chainsaw Man anime director, Ryu Nakayama, an individual who unfortunately fell into the crosshairs of the anime community because of his direct involvement as the director. These interviews hold critical information that will lend itself extremely useful and provide context for whether Chainsaw Man is cinematic. The third point will shift focus from the director to the general public, where I try to tackle what it means to be cinematic, a word I've constantly seen floating around in Chainsaw Man anime discussions. A significant portion of this video will rely on the testimony given to me by 5 individuals and their definitions of what cinematic means. The fourth point is where the bulk of my reasoning takes place, and the final part. This section will have various subsections in relation to the Chainsaw Man anime and manga, but the overarching theme is I will take a constructed lens of what it means to be cinematic from the previous 5 interviews and apply it onto the different elements used within the Chainsaw Man anime. There's an abundance of different points to talk about within this grand argument, and I hope I'll be able to keep your attention throughout it all. That being said, I think we should be briefed and ready to start. Without further ado, let's take a look at the fall of 2022, a season which resembled the Wild West, a season filled with bangers. One of the elements that makes Chainsaw Man such an enjoyable series is found within an element of its storytelling, the sheer absurdity. Tatsuki Fujimoto is no stranger to presenting jaw-dropping narrative points that have a reader either falling to their knees from laughter or staying still in a state of shock. This element of absurdity bleeds into every aspect of the Chainsaw Man series, such as the bizarre fights or the daily comings and goings of all the characters. Even with all of the absurd story beats, Chainsaw Man's story is simple. It's a tale of a boy who comes to learn and appreciate new experiences, only for it to be violently ripped away from him. It's the manner in which the story is told that makes it remarkable and a breath of fresh air compared to other more drive-through-esque series that always manage to choke the general public. It is through this unique story that Chainsaw Man has planted its foot within the zeitgeist of the manga world. I mean, consider why you've clicked on this video. Perhaps you're someone who has read and watched Chainsaw Man, and through your interest on the subject, find yourselves intrigued by the discourse. You've probably met someone who has either heard of, is reading, or has read the series. If I recall back a few months ago, all the Chainsaw Man Volume 1 copies were sold out at a local Barnes & Noble at the time of release of the anime debut. It's undeniable that Chainsaw Man is a behemoth of a franchise and succeeded in taking its first steps out of paper and ink and onto the airways in the fall of 2022. However, as highly praised as Chainsaw Man is in terms of its manga, the anime is a different story. During Chainsaw Man's anime debut, a steady stream of competitors had all decided to enter the race and form a dangerous rogues gallery for this beloved series. During the Chainsaw Man debut, the colossal spy family returned for its second core, a metaphorical victory lap from its first season's impressive success. The final season of Mob Psycho, an anime which I have recently started at the time of recording and has completely blown me away. My Hero Academia, a series that does especially well with the more mainstream audience of anime watchers. The long-awaited revival of the Bleach anime took center stage as its final season was finally being animated after so many years. And ultimately, the unprecedented Bocchi the Rock all vied against each other to aim for this season's top anime. Unfortunately, I'm not going to count Blue Lock because I feel that after Japan was eliminated in the FIFA World Cup, the hype kind of died down. There are of course others I haven't mentioned, but it just comes to show how tight this particular season was. Specifically, all the above-mentioned series had enormous built-in fan bases either from a strong manga foundation reaping what it sowed or snowballed hype from a previous season's cliffhanger. All except Bocchi the Rock, who was a bit low-key towards the beginning of the season. I don't think it's a controversial take to say that this was truly a glorious fall season, packed with back-to-back weekly entertainment. But after the dust had settled, and as we transitioned to the winter, many on the internet rushed to crown Bocchi the Rock as the definitive victor of being the best anime of fall 2022. Many, including myself, were left baffled at how a show that focused on an insecure pink blob's introverted ass trying to make friends managed to go head-to-head with quite possibly the most anticipated anime adaptation of all time. As months progressed and more information came out, there was a particularly scathing report on the number of Blu-ray and DVD sales for Bocchi the Rock and Chainsaw Man. Even to this day, many critics of the Chainsaw Man anime use this particular information as a silver bullet to prove that Botchers truly reigns supreme over Denji. The following data reported that Bocchi the Rock sold well over 16,000 copies in its first week compared to the Chainsaw Man anime, which had managed to sell under 2,000 copies. While these disc sales should not be a metric that accurately captures the feelings of the general population towards the Chainsaw Man anime, it's still a tangible number that provides some relevance to the discussion of the popularity of these series. I do not partake in the sentiment that this data showcases without a doubt that Bocchi the Rock slaughtered Chainsaw Man in terms of overall viewing. I think the opposite, but still. That's a hazardous statement that has no concrete proof as of this moment. But I think the very idea of Blu-rays and DVDs provide some semblance of information we can play around with. Buying merchandise is a commitment. Specifically, it's a financial and timely commitment. Let's narrow our view on the topic. Buying a DVD of your favorite anime won't come cheap. To go ahead and buy a DVD of a show means that the impact of said show was so great that you want to rewatch it within the comfort of your home or whenever you just really want to re-experience whatever feelings you felt the first time. For more devout fans, purchasing a DVD is more of an expression of support, where your money is going directly to the creators of the content. Circling back to the main topic of this point, why did Chainsaw Man perform so low when realistically speaking this series has an enormous built-in fan base derived from the manga? The question that connects these 2 points is why didn't the manga fans buy the Chainsaw Man DVDs? To answer this question, I think I have a perfect anecdotal example. It was a few months ago I had finished completing my collection of the Chainsaw Man Part 1 volumes. It was at the same time I had no urge to go out of my way and purchase the DVD for the Chainsaw Man Season 1 anime. I mean, even if at the time it wasn't released for the States, I still to this day have no intention whatsoever of purchasing them. There were particularly 2 reasons, and one of them in particular may be echoed throughout this video as some sort of Grim Reaper stalking us. The first was that I had no desire to watch the anime for the fun of it. From the 3 different times I had seen this anime, there was a specific purpose, either watching it with friends and family, or the purpose of this video. I don't really feel like kicking back on my day off and turning on the TV to watch more of the Chainsaw Man anime. The second reason, the more important one, was that the anime just didn't feel like reading the manga. That's not necessarily a negative attribute of the anime, but rather that when reading a manga, I control the pacing of the story, whereas the anime takes a more elongated passage. More on that definitely later. The anime is a different breed, the same story with its own interpretation from the manga. That's fine. Every adaptation is allowed to have their own unique take on the source material. It's just that I didn't find the anime as fun to consume when compared to the manga. This second point will definitely be expanded on later in this video, but I want to introduce it now so you can take your time and reflect on your own habits and patterns when reading manga and really noticing how quickly you glaze over illustrations. As I said earlier, and as I will repeat, continuously because I know some people can't really understand it, these points are not criticisms against the Chainsaw Man anime, but more so as a description of what I watched and what I felt was different. I tried to hold myself to a promise that while making this video, I wouldn't go off on any major tangents, but when it comes to the Bocchi vs. Chainsaw Man discussion, I can't really help it. I think there are primarily two reasons why Bocchi was able to dominate the internet and steal some of the Chainsaw Man anime hype. Those reasons are the potential audience reach and human nature. While the Blu-ray and DVD sales provide some information, these numbers are still based on Japan's consumerism and give us an idea on how the country felt. But we should ideally take a step back and gaze at the popularity of this series in a more holistic approach to the world. Chainsaw Man has undoubtedly spread past international borders. Whether it be internet discourse or when interacting with others in real life, you're bound to either hear or see the topic of Chainsaw Man floating around. I don't think it's a false claim to assume that Studio Mappa most definitely held the assumption that Chainsaw Man would gravitate audiences toward it on a global stage, almost to the effect of Attack on Titan or Jujutsu Kaisen, seeing as how popular those anime were. I mean, I want you to really think about this part. Companies are known for investing in products that will surely make their money back. This latest craze over video game adaptations being picked up by different streaming sites is a clear example of companies knowing that with adaptations there will always be an inherent audience from the source material. For instance, consider the impact of Attack on Titan. Over here in the States, you're extremely likely to see at least one person walking around with Attack on Titan merchandise in a non-anime setting. I've had colleagues and even professors admit to watching Attack on Titan as their first ever anime they've ever watched. Mappa clearly wanted to aim for another show that would establish this global dominance through their unique cinematic flavor adaptation. Maybe it was the manner in which the adaptation was directed, such as this specific cinematic style, that led to a smaller audience reach. They wanted their show to dip their toes into the section of the public that typically doesn't watch anime, similarly to how Attack on Titan did. Only time will tell if the Chainsaw Man anime did capture that lightning in a bottle, but I can tell you one thing for certain. I ain't ever seen any Chainsaw Man merchandise out in public since the anime debuted. A bit of an update on this part, it seems that the CEO of Mappa came out in an interview stating that he is slightly disappointed that Chainsaw Man did not reach the same levels of success as Jujutsu Kaisen did, another anime that similarly dominated the public. That being said, it seems that Chainsaw Man was successful, but rather it just failed to meet expectations. In simpler terms, let's use a score out of 100 being a success. Chainsaw Man reached 100 while the CEO expected it to reach 120. The second reason why Bocchi surprisingly dominated is in relation to a more fundamental aspect of humans, our inclination for joy over sadness. Bocchi the Rock is a show tailor-made to make you laugh and relate. It's undeniable that it's an enjoyable ride through and through. It provides for a lighthearted evening and a great comfort anime to watch with the boys. Let's get down to the brass tacks over here. Comparing the generally feel-good anime of Bocchi the Rock to just the first episode of Chainsaw Man, which came off as a dark and depressing episode, can admittedly turn off people. I wish I had saved images of people saying that Chainsaw Man would dominate the airways over Spy Family's second core, and well, I think that was a resounding no. I would argue that people in general want to feel good. When we consume anime, or really when we consume media, we're looking for an outlet from the daily stresses of life. I mean, that's probably one of the reasons why the isekai genre continues to produce consistent slop that the piggies all enjoy. The keyword in the point is tone. Even taking a look at the main characters of both shows, Bocchi comes off as a far more relatable character. An individual who has crippling social anxiety, as most anime fans do. Opposed to Denji, who, well, has an obsession with Makima's personality? See, I told you all, the Muscle Devil was extremely important, but more on that specific sin later. This video serves to inspect the why of why several Chainsaw Man fans were disappointed with the anime adaptation. This why has several answers that may not leave listeners happy. It's a mixture of different creative choices that led to a distinct Chainsaw Man anime. As a general preface, I don't think that the use of CGI within the anime was a reason why the adaptation should be considered to be bad. In fact, I believe that CGI is really just the scapegoat for why many dislike the adaptation, when the real conflict viewers had with the anime was the combination of two different aspects that were fundamental to the overall directing. the pacing, and the cinematic style of presentation that affected the tone. CGI is constant within the anime industry and bleeds into all genres, so its use within the anime shouldn't really come to a surprise to many. I agree to an extent that the Chainsaw Man head looks quite silly, but that's just a superficial reason for disliking the anime and doesn't contribute much to an overall critique. Now, I don't want you to come away with me stating that the pacing and cinematic style ruined Chainsaw Man. Rather, I want you to understand that these two aspects played a critical role in changing Chainsaw Man's core and the tone of what we know as the Katana Man arc. I want us to take a specific framing when analyzing the Chainsaw Man adaptation, not as a standalone show, but through the lens of an adaptation. All in all, this topic is a certainly controversial one. Even if we disagree, I hope you continue throughout this video. At the end of the day, I'm assuming that we're both here because we love Chainsaw Man. Now that we've covered the background for the Chainsaw Man anime debut, we can take a look at the more controversial interviews given by Ryu Nakayama, the director of the Chainsaw Man anime. Ryu Nakayama is a name I didn't really know before the Chainsaw Man anime. Admittedly, even after watching the anime, I didn't pay too much attention to his name either. The first time that I can recall ever being exposed to him was when a friend of mine linked me to a change.org page where a group of cretins had come together and made a petition to remove Ryu Nakayama as the director of the Chainsaw Man anime. The primary reason being their displeasure towards the adaptation. Of course, my first reaction when seeing this was sheer secondhand embarrassment from the sense of entitlement these people had. It was only a few months after my decision to research the Chainsaw Man anime's production information that I came across two particularly interesting interviews given by Nakayama. But before we get into reviewing the responses from the interview, I want to take a look at Nakayama's role in other anime. In general, he was a fairly low-profile director who was in charge of directing single episodes within different shows, such as Jujutsu Kaisen, Black Clover, and The Rising of the Shield Hero. I think it's pretty uncontroversial to state that Nakayama never had a critical spotlight shown over him until now. I suggest for yourself to go seek out the list of anime episodes he's directed. The point here is that Nakayama hasn't been placed in the sole director position before, which makes it all the more puzzling as to why this specific individual was chosen to direct the most highly anticipated anime adaptation. You'd assume someone who has a veteran streak to be the one in charge, but this was certainly puzzling. I'll go ahead and link the two interviews in the description of this video so that you can read it yourselves and draw your own conclusions. For the purposes of this video, I'll focus on specific responses that Nakayama gives to the interviewer that are important towards the topic of this video. And I'm going to be voicing both the interviewer and Nakayama, so hopefully I'll put up some text to make sure you know who's the one specifically talking. Anyway, let's start. I think there's been a lot of pressure to be chosen as the director of a popular manga even though it is your first work as a director. How did you feel when you were asked to direct the anime? I've been reading Tatsuki Fujimoto sensei's works in real time every week since the first episode of Fire Punch was distributed on Shonen Jump Plus. I've also seen the atmosphere of the serialization and how it became popular among readers. Because of this personal attachment, I remember telling Mr. Seshita that if he would allow me to direct, I would certainly give it a try. From this first question, we can draw out several important conclusions. Chainsaw Man is Nakayama's first manga adaptation where he's the director. Even though I can't hear his voice, I can already imagine how anxious he must be from taking on the insurmountable weight of adapting one of the most popular manga series. But this anxiety shouldn't worry the audience because unlike the Halo TV show writers, Nakayama has stated that he's been a fan of Fujimoto's works since the era of Fire Punch. He understands the importance of the atmosphere, or how I may like to call it tone, that makes Chainsaw Man so unique in a sea of generic series. I cannot stress how important it is for a director who is in charge of an adaptation to not only like the series they're adapting, but also to have read the source material. Trust me, it's getting a bit rare these days to find people like that. Nakayama is not an individual who brushes off the source material and pretends to be above it. He is someone who loves this series as much as we do and wants to give a fair shot at this gargantuan task. I think that having a different song for each episode with images by the director in charge of each helped the viewer to understand the main anime even better. We also think that it helped to express the multifaceted nature of the work and its implications. I highly suggest you read the full interview for yourself because Nakayama goes more in depth in relation to the 12 unique endings. I was deciding on whether talking about the 12 unique endings, whether it's relevant to this segment or later on in the video, but I'll go ahead and say my piece now. I don't think Nakayama should have focused so much on the endings on trying to make them unique. I'll go out on a limb and argue that typically, most anime fans tend to skip the ending credit theme, unless the ending song is an absolute banger and holds some significance for the next anime episode. Most watchers are probably going to skip over it to watch the next episode. Let's take two unique examples. It's almost impossible to skip the ending song Lost in Paradise, showcased in Jujutsu Kaisen. It has no relevance to the anime episode itself, but viewers will stay and watch it because it's just such a great song. Hell, if you go to the comments section of the YouTube video itself, you'll probably find comments saying, the one anime ending we don't skip. Another example would have to be Shunken Sentimental, showcased as the ending song for Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. You'll find videos where they clip the ending of the episode transitioning towards the ending theme. The ending song is just perfect, it's epic, it's almost predicting some big showdown for the characters of the series, which it does. I hate to say this, but considering that I watched the Chainsaw Man anime 3 times, the only ending whose beat I fully remember is Power's ending, and that's only because all the Power stands couldn't stop posting it on their timelines. None of the ending themes were memorable. Now I get it. Music is more subjective, but this is more of a personal criticism more than anything else. The larger argument here is that Nakayama oversaw the development of these unique endings and designated them to be important to the episode. The only reason I really have an issue with this time and resource allocation is because later in the interview, Nakayama states that drawing Denji's chainsaw head would take too much time and that the CGI would circumvent the time it would take if it were hand-drawn. Those resources could have gone to more animators. Like I said, the CGI isn't a reason why the anime is bad, but it definitely would have helped get rid of one easy way to beat criticism. Did you receive any orders from Tatsuki Fujimoto-sensei for the anime adaptation? I received a push from Tatsuki Fujimoto who said, please take good care of Chainsaw Man. I like Fujimoto's manga to begin with. I like Chainsaw Man, and I also like Fire Punch. I also like short stories such as Look Back and Sayonara Eri. So rather than trying to put my own color into the work, I wanted to convey the appeal of Fujimoto-sensei's work to as many people as possible. So that's what we discussed. Also, in the course of our discussions with Fujimoto-sensei, he respected our ideas, and I feel that he gave us an environment that made it very easy for us to create animation. I'm really happy that this specific question was asked on behalf of the interviewer. One popular gotcha point that internet users love to use is whether the original creator either hates or loves the adaptation that is based on their work. That argument is quickly shut down here as it seems that Fujimoto okayed the development of the adaptation, respecting the artistic choices that Nakayama went forward with. There is no conflict of creator versus adapter, and instead a healthy relationship between a mentor and mentee. Now, I could play devil's advocate and say that Fujimoto doesn't really care how the animation is done, and is simply okaying it because, well, why not? Fujimoto's an interesting guy. I think that there was another interview where he said he was happy to be working with MAPPA because they gave him free food. He's a bit of a wild card. It's also in this same response on Nakayama's part that brings up an important question that's essential to understanding the challenging aspects of adaptations. Nakayama wants to convey the appeal of Fujimoto's work, meaning the Chainsaw Man anime adaptation is what Nakayama believes the Chainsaw Man is within the anime medium. I wanted to keep that perfect balance in the anime adaptation. When a manga is made into an anime, someone else takes on the role of director, but since the author and director are completely different people, they inevitably have to create the work from different perspectives. In this context, I want to create a work that expresses the core atmosphere in an important way, while at the same time making it interesting for people who come into contact with Chainsaw Man for the first time through the anime. Let's try to explain the inherent problem with adaptations. Person A sees the color red. Person A tells person B they saw the color red. Person B then must tell person C what color person A saw. It's at this point that while both persons A and C might agree to the general color red, we don't know what specific shade of red person C thinks person A explained. This is a convoluted way of stating that a person's interpretation of a series may be different from the original creator's interpretation. This is the issue with perspective on how art, an incredibly subjective concept, can become even more confusing. I think that Nakayama took away a specific tone from Fujimoto's intent in making Chainsaw Man, and that's one of the reasons why the audience, in the example Person C, notices the differences between the manga and the anime. What I like about Nakayama is that he's upfront about this particular issue of interpretation and doesn't attempt to hide it or make it his scapegoat. He blatantly states that the anime adaptation will have a different interpretation of how he understood Chainsaw Man. Why do you think that the manga is more frightening when it's made into an anime? For example, when you look at the depiction of cutting down an enemy in manga, you only need one frame of the picture after the enemy is cut down to get the message across. But in anime, the whole sequence of actions is depicted, so does that make it seem more horrifying? Manga allows the reader to take the initiative in reading the manga. It is you who turn the pages of the comic, and it is also you who is conscious of the next panel. Therefore, if you are not a fan of grotesque depictions, you will probably unconsciously skip over such a panel in a manga. Read manga the way you want to read it, and you can read manga in a way that suits your own sensibilities, which is what manga is. Chainsaw Man is a work with particularly large margins. Because it is a manga with such unique tempo, what you feel in the margins and what feelings you subconsciously apply to it will vary greatly from person to person. While this question the interviewer asks is more focused on the horror and bloody violence angle of Chainsaw Man, I think that Nakayama's response here is integral to this video's discussion and serves as a target for why individuals who didn't like the adaptation have such a strong disliking towards it. Pacing is one of the all-important elements within fiction. It can be used correctly to great success or used disastrously incorrectly. As readers, we control the pacing at our own speed. Nakayama points this out through Fujimoto's use of margins within the Chainsaw Man manga. Margins within a manga allow the reader's imagination to fill in the missing event or action. Let's use one of the first major fights in the Chainsaw Man manga to explore this idea. Thankfully, since this fight has been animated, we can compare the manga and its margins to the anime adaptation. The Aki vs. Katana Man fight is a brief one, but is one of the key moments in Chainsaw Man. During this fight, the manga uses the margins in key spots to allow the reader to bridge what actions took place. In the manga, Katana Man engages into a stance, lands, and delivers a finishing blow against Aki. We never saw the point of launch, nor the actual impact of Aki's body. The anime replicates the same steps, but the difference here is that the pause, the brief moment where Katana Man's attack is pending and Aki is just standing. The actual animation of Aki being hit by the attack and dropping to his knees. The smooth motion of impact and collapse is an action event manga readers would bridge in a dynamic motion, while the anime takes the time to animate these same movements. We can even look at the first episode of Chainsaw Man, which is filled with these long shots that are saturated in bleakness. The anime takes the driver's seat and designates how much time it wants us to spend in a specific moment, while manga readers are free to roam at their own pace. I'm not arguing that the Chainsaw Man anime had horrible pacing, but rather that manga readers are probably reading events faster than the anime can animate them. That sums it up for this first interview. Now let's take a look at the second, more problematic interview Nakayama gave that prompted the controversy of wanting to remove his position as a director. What do you focus on in the production of your animations? I would like to express a live-action style screen using the common ground with Mr. Fujimoto sensei, who is a movie buff, as a stepping stone on the premise that I should work with respect so as not to destroy the atmosphere of the original manga. We have reduced deformation and have placed emphasis on how we want the viewer to see the anime as a visual image, rather than easily giving it an anime-like appearance. This response in particular was the spark that induced hundreds of angry internet users to call for the resignation of Nakayama. Unfortunately, this response was maligned and misinterpreted to instead say, "I hate anime-like appearances," as this is usually the go-to defense enemies of the Chainsaw Man manga fall back on. In reality, it's not really Nakayama taking a dig at anime-styled animation, but rather an ideal interpretation of how he wants the adaptation to be made. Firstly, and more importantly, we need to understand that Fujimoto is obsessed with cinema. Cinema as in the physical space, or as the actual content being watched. Fujimoto has not only expressed his love for cinema in both the Chainsaw Man anime, but also in various examples within his manga. Nakayama, as a fan of Fujimoto's writing, picked up on this element and wanted to incorporate it into the adaptation. The live-action style Nakayama mentions in his response is what I want to transform into cinematic style, as he wanted this particular style of interpretation to be more serious, one could say a bit more realistic, to mimic what you would see in a movie theater. He believes that through this cinematic flavor of adaptation that Chainsaw Man will be elevated and become a distinct product when compared to other anime. I think that when he says anime styled, he probably was thinking of mid-tier animation that was from alright anime shows. You know, nothing spectacular. I don't think that it's a controversial claim to state that animation is a variable that can very well elevate an anime to the public's general attention. Consider Demon Slayer, an anime with an extremely standard plot. There's really nothing that unique about the show when considering it's a typical shonen story but on a smaller scale of volumes. This anime was elevated to the mainstream audience's full attention due to Ufotable's stellar work in their animation department and how well they showed the action scenes. For the most part, Nakayama did succeed in delivering an anime with a distinct taste. At the time of release, no other anime in that same season could replicate the level of intensity the animation in Chainsaw Man had, except for maybe Bocchi, who consistently broke the mold with their animations, sometimes even going to 3D models. To us anime watchers, the Chainsaw Man anime felt like it had a higher degree of animation which was aiming for higher heights, capable of savoring its distinctive elements such as the heavy long shots, muted colors, and depressing ambiance. This particular response and Nakayama's specific cinematic style are what we'll be measuring throughout this video, so do keep that in the back of your head. I think both of these interviews show a level of care and passion he intended to produce with the Chainsaw Man anime. Feel free to read these interviews in full. Links are in the description. Now that we've gathered some evidence from the director himself, it's time to grab some popcorn and turn off your notifications. We're going to the movies to find out what it means to be cinematic. What is cinema? What is cinematic? And how do they relate to Chainsaw Man? These are all questions we'll try to aim to answer within this next section of the video. But before we go on to describing the various meanings and definitions of cinematic, we need to address why cinema seems to be at the root of all Fujimoto's creations. Nakayama previously stated that cinema is an important element in Fujimoto's works. I would say the theme of cinema is more prominent within Fire Punch as a passage of life and death, and Goodbye Eri where it's used as a tool to alter narrative. The movie theater is a space Fujimoto has designated as an intimate room where two or more individuals can expose their inner feelings. No other scene in Fujimoto's works expresses this feeling than the scene with the movie theater date between Makima and Denji during the Bomb Girl arc. Within this short tale, one particular movie out of the various others is able to resonate with both Makima and Denji to the point they're inexplicably crying. While we only see the story through Denji's perspective and his thoughts, there's subtext throughout this scene that leads us to build on Makima's character. The movie in particular that made the two cry had a scene where two individuals share a hug. This focuses squarely on the control devil's desire to be held by another individual. Movies are always able to evoke feelings within us. I've always had this eternal question within me, whether the role of fiction is meant to show us a fantastical land that we could never dream of, or rather a recreation of our mundane lives. I think as I continue to consume more fiction that the latter is more true. Humans love to see their struggles and victories on the screen so that they feel validated. It's probably why the Literally Me movies are cult classics, because they resonate with an individual who feels like their identity has been submerged within the wave of faceless nobodies. The movie theater is the space where we can expose our true selves, but if Fujimoto has taught us anything, the intimate space of the movie theater doesn't have to be the actual physical location located in your local mall. Instead, it can be in the comfort of your own home. Movies are tantamount, as they're capable of wringing these emotions out of you. Fujimoto loves movies as much as James Cameron loves water. At the time of the Chainsaw Man anime debut, one of the trending discussions on the internet was the various movie references shown within the Chainsaw Man opening Kick Back. But this single opening was merely scratching the surface on how much he obsesses over movies. Within the story of Fire Punch, I felt like Fujimoto self-inserted himself into the story through the character Togata, a filmmaker in a post-apocalyptic world who wanted to capture the essence of a hero in the barren wasteland. Nakayama understood the importance of movies, or how we may now put it, the importance of cinema. He meant to skip the anime-like appearance to instead capture a more visual piece that contained a cinematic style to match the style of presentations within movies. But this claim now presents more challenging issues. What does it mean to be cinematic? What movies provide examples of a cinematic shot? And what elements do we consider to be cinematic within a movie? The problem with answering these questions is that the general public all have different interpretations of what cinematic is. Merely my take would be insufficient, as many of you probably have other, possibly contradictory interpretations from my own. That is why I've done something special. I've selected a pool of individuals and asked them about 2 to 3 questions based on what it means to be cinematic. For this next section, I'll present to you 5 different takes on what cinema means, what cinematic means, and if the question corresponds over, what the individuals thought of the Chainsaw Man anime. After every conversation, we'll take a brief respite before continuing over to the next interview and focus on the key takeaways. Hopefully, by the time we finish all 5, we'll have a more accurate description of what it means to be cinematic. I'm very excited, as I haven't really briefed the individuals on what they're going to be asked to ensure we get a genuine answer. Without further ado, let's begin our first interview with a dear friend of mine, Dag. Hey Dag, how are you?
I'm doing alright, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Okay, so Dag, the reason I called you today is because in this video that I'm making, I have about 2-3 questions I really want to ask you and get your opinion on. You
Okay,
don't the subject matter of the actual video is something you don't need to know. It's just more of a universal question. Is that fine? Can I ask you that?
sure, why not?
Okay, sweet. So my first question is, what do you think of when the word cinema pops up in your head?
Cinema. Well, I think of two things. The first thing is cinema is what they use in the UK for like movie theater. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind. But also the second thing, also like the movie theater, like, like going to AMC or Regal, like one of those local movie theaters that I've been to. That's what it means to me. Like just gonna go to a movie theater and watch a movie.
Okay, so when the word movie comes up into your mind, you imagine the physical location.
Yes, both physical and also the length of like a movie. Because when I think of a movie, I feel like it's gonna be like more than an hour, 30 minutes, something that's going to take a while. And also has like a story that progresses throughout the film. So it gets like, it starts somewhere here, then as you watch more and more, there's like, there's one point here, and then as the movie goes on, there's another point here, and then it comes to its conclusion. Also, I think of like big budget, more money's put into it, like 20 movies can cost like 50 to $60 million. You know what I'm saying? Popcorn as well, you know. But that's what I think of movies.
Well, no,
So yeah.
see, it's cinema, right? So when the
hmm
word cinema pops up, you think of the physical location, or you think of just the runtime of a movie. You think of the actual movie conceptually, correct?
Yes and no. I would say experience and also like my actual movie itself as well.
The actual
So
experience of watching a movie
hmm
is comes up to your head when you think of cinema.
yeah,
For the second question, I want to know your opinion on what it means to be cinematic.
I would say it's probably like relating to a movie in the sense where like the way it's organized or developed. There's like a lot of like I previously explained. There's like a big budget towards like certain parts of the film or in the film itself. The cinematography as well. I'm not sure. Remember Danny? He was really big into movies, and he always talked about the cinematography and also like how the angles of certain shots in the movie would look. So that's what I also think of it because like when you're watching a regular TV show, you can tell like certain shots in the show isn't as precise or isn't as good as compared to a movie because like a movie, right? When you look at the way it's like the techniques that they use, you could say okay the camera looks different because they have this here or this there. I mean, that's what I at least think of it when it comes to that definition.
As you will clearly pick up on in a few minutes, this first interview is given by someone who has not watched Chainsaw Man, meaning that the answers we receive will be more accurate to the general public. This first interview is strategically placed at the beginning of our discussion because I believe it acts as a solid foundation for the various definitions and concepts these questions introduce. The 3 questions we are primarily concerned with answering are what is cinema, what is cinematic, and what the interviewed individual thinks of the Chainsaw Man anime. In this first interview, Dag explains what his own interpretation of cinema means. Cinema has a double meaning in our contemporary time, as it can be first used as a physical descriptor of the cinema, that being the literal movie theater. The word cinema can also imply some sort of qualitative value. Have you ever seen that meme of Martin Scorsese saying, "This is cinema"? Well, clearly it's not meant to reference movie theaters, but the quality of a movie. Our language has taken cinema to mean a descriptor, rather a noun. When someone describes a movie as, "this is cinema," then you know that they're referring to the movie's cinematic elements such as framing or pacing. This is touched on when Dag is asked what cinematic means, in which he responds that it's not only the blend of budgeting or storytelling, but also to the more observable elements such as specific angles and shots that elevate a film to be more professional. I think Dag's explanation on the difference between TV filmmaking and movie filmmaking are especially important in relation to Nakayama's comments to not wanting to look anime-esque. He wanted it to have this distinctive aroma and grandeur that would clearly set itself apart from the other anime at the time of release. In summary, what we can take away from interview number 1 is that cinema can mean the physical location of a movie theater and can be used as a descriptor for films. The other takeaway is that the word cinematic describes the budget, the storytelling, the higher level of animation, and the observable elements as we classify as cinematography, such as specific angles of framing or scenes. Interview number 2 is with another dear friend of mine, an aspiring VTuber, Water. Hi Water, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing excellent. How's my favorite VTuber doing?
I mean, I'm fine. In regards to that, I just upload my reactions every Sunday. I've been meaning to do other ones, but I just haven't had the energy lately.
I have about 3 questions today. You see, I'm in the process of making a video, and I'm really looking for input to really conceptual questions. Do you think you have enough time to answer these 3 questions today?
Yeah, of course.
Excellent. Okay, so this first question might stump you a bit. What is cinema in your opinion?
Cinema, like, as in, like, cinematography, like, stuff, like movies.
Well, no. Cinema specifically, just the word cinema.
I always think of how things are edited, right? Like, especially in movies and things. I think how things are shot, how things are, like, directed and portrayed, that's what I consider to be proper cinema.
So your meaning definition is more on the technical level of the process.
Yes, I do.
Okay. What do you think of when you hear the word cinematic?
Cinematic, I think of it having like something having like a certain like atmosphere that gives this sort of like grandeur or grandness to it. It's sort of like for example, like I think of like major cutscenes in like games or I think of League of Legends, like some of their really nice like graphics. That comes to mind instantly when I think of cinematic stuff.
Okay, so I really want to focus on that point where you said it feels like this, like some grand image. Can you come up with an example of maybe a latest movie you've watched that really focuses in on that grandiose feeling?
I guess a good example would be I watched Tsunami relatively recently. It's, the recent Makoto Shinkai film,
anime,
right?
Okay.
So his movies are definitely cinematic, for sure, based on how they have, like, large sweeping narratives, save Japan, very dramatic moments. It's, like, the only sort of thing you'd experience in a movie. You never experience it anywhere else, Yeah.
The interesting point to hear about that. Actually, no, we're going to include a 4th question now. What did you think about the Suzume anime movie?
I liked it better than Weathering with You, personally. I felt that it had a slightly more personal take, and it was also inspired by the, I think, 2011, earthquake or tsunamis in Japan. Like, it was a major natural disaster. So the Makoto Shinkai wanted to create a film based off that disaster and the impacts it had on the people years later. So I thought it was an interesting reason.
So based on what you saw, would you say this was the weakest of the 3 movies compared with Weathering You and Your Name?
Personally, I actually liked it it's either my second favorite or my favorite. Because I found that there's definitely some parts that are kind of meh, in my opinion, but I think it has, out of his films, some of the strongest themes. It's less romance focused and more focused on a journey of healing and like traveling and learning about different types of people.
You are the first person I've met who's probably said that it's maybe their favorite, which is like from most of the opinions I've been hearing, it seems to be like, yeah, it's not the best work, or it's not the best, but hearing this is kind of a refreshing take. And my 3rd question is, now I know that you're not really the biggest Chainsaw Man fan, but you still did watch the anime alongside with other people, correct?
Yes, I watched it all like in a watch along. Mm-hmm.
So you kept up with it weekly, correct?
At least anime, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you feel any cinematic shots in the anime?
The anime? I don't know about cinematic exactly, but you could definitely tell that based on the direction, it was going for something more realistic than not, especially with color palette. You could tell there's a lot of effort put into it, right? Like, you could tell there's a lot of care put into how it's, like, shot and the direction and stuff. But compared to other things I've seen, it's definitely not the most cinematic thing I'd think of. I just think that there's a lot of effort put into it.
Okay, and that's all the questions I have, Water. Thanks for answering my questions.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for allowing me to talk.
As we continue to delve deeper into the various interviews, I'll build off of some points established in these interviews prior. When asked about what cinema is, Water's answer was less focused on the physical location, but more so on the technical aspect of cinematography, highlighting this difference in meaning we briefly touched on. The response that caught my particular attention was in her response towards the second question. When asked what cinematic means, she stated that it reminds her of some grand atmosphere of a scene or also an in-game cutscene. Now let's focus on the second meaning for now. These larger-than-life in-game cutscenes have the potential to rival movies. At the time of recording, I've been playing Ghost of Tsushima, a truly stunning game. What captivates me most is the environment, a detail which the creators have poured their soul into. It truly feels immersive. More importantly, a player feels like they're quite literally in a movie. While you're riding your noble steed through a forest in blossom or perhaps dueling with another, the scene comes together as this movie-esque production. It's jaw-dropping. It's unbelievable. It's so hard to put into words, but when you see it, you feel it. It's an inherent feeling. Let's focus on the other response Waters said. The grand atmosphere of a scene. She specifically states Tsunami, the recent chair anime made by Makoto Shinkai. Unfortunately, I haven't watched it yet, but I have delved into the world of Makoto Shinkai films before, in particular Your Name and The Garden of Words, so I understand what Water is alluding to with her description. When I asked Water whether she felt that there was anything cinematic in the Chainsaw Man anime, she stated it didn't feel cinematic but rather realistic. Let's expand on this specific point as I want to change the label on realism. Romance anime as of late has been pushing this boundary. In particular, audiences have fallen in love with shows such as My Dress-Up Darling because of the more outward female heroines. The realism in these types of anime is that the female character who have traditionally been more quieter and less proactive in seeking a relationship with MC-kun are now the ones who are straight up confessing. This realistic take on the romance genre is that female characters now have their own agency and are given the screen time to become as equal to the main character. So what is it about the Chainsaw Man anime that would lead anyone to believe it's more realistic? Water stated that the color palette and specific framing of shots could be within the branch of a realistic take. However, I think Chainsaw Man has a cinematic take with realistic elements. I think it's fairly obvious that the scene with Aki brewing coffee is realistic, withholding the amount of detail poured into making the scene itself, possibly rivaling Ufotable's cooking. It's the scene watchers will point to for the realistic atmosphere. I believe that the color choice and specific framing more so fall under the larger classification of cinematic, as color choices, I believe, were chosen not to be more realistic but to evoke specific feelings. There's an interesting comparison on YouTube of an individual who animated the Katana Man fight compared to the actual anime fight between Aki and Katana Man. Just by watching these two animations, it's obvious that while the anime holds a more realistic, and I say this very cautiously, sense of fighting, the manga feels more heavier, creepier, and captures the essence of Fujimoto's drawings. I mean, while I understand that some individuals may think that the anime wants you to feel like there's a realistic style, the second I see the CGI Curse Devil chomping on Katana Man, I kinda lose it. Maybe this might be a personal itch for me, but I can't really call anything that involves floating CGI devils as realistic. Even then, is Chainsaw Man the manga realistic? Personally, I felt like it was supposed to be absurd. Something that would have trouble being animated if the animation had a realistic sense of directing in mind. I want you to mull over this argument because we're starting to note a divide in interpretation, all on a part of Nakayama's directing. If anything, looping back to the Makoto Shinkai films, The Garden of Words has quite possibly the most realistic environment, while Chainsaw Man's style of animating cities or landscapes always felt like it was purposefully drawn to be dull and unimportant, rather more so than usual. From this interview, I want you to take away 2 points that will be called back on later in this video. The first is this grandiose feeling that cinematic shots evoke from an audience. The second is to notice the difference between a cinematic and a realistic style of directing. Our third interview is with another friend, Tsunami. Hey Tsunami, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm I'm hanging in there. We're all surviving right now. So, Tsunami,
Relatable.
I got you here because I have a bit of an experiment going on. Would you like to partake in it?
Yes, I'm ready for this challenge.
Yeah, I've been forcing you into it almost. All right, so it's gonna be two, maybe three questions because I think the last question I need a refresher. I think you might have done what the third question is aiming for, but the first question is, what do you think of when the word cinema pops into your head?
Automatically, okay, I start thinking of movies and I start thinking of like, like those old like cinema theaters type of thing. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I started thinking of that. Like, it's not completely related, but when I think of cinema, I think of like, I don't know if they still do it, but like, like those drive-in like movie theater type of things. I don't know why, but I think of that. I guess I don't know, like the word cinema, I think of something old school, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay, old school. Interesting when you think about drive-in movie theaters. Would you say those are very intimate places, spaces?
I guess it's like a big social hub, if that makes sense.
Social hub. Okay, so when you think of cinema, you think of a characteristic such as social hub.
Yeah, I think so. Because it's like, I guess, a collective space where like everyone's going to see like this one movie or like this one production type of thing. So
Oh,
it's
so interesting. But like when you think of social hub, it's would you say there's a lot of socializing going on? I mean, everyone's kind of
oh,
paying attention to the
well,
screen.
yeah, I guess that's true. But I mean, like, I guess indirect socializing, because I mean, you're all there together, and you guys all have, I guess, that collective, like you're all there to enjoy something, right? So in some ways, you guys are socialize. Not, I guess not direct socializing, but in terms of like I guess those sentiments of like, oh, we're all here to like enjoy this space and enjoy this movie or enjoy this like production that we're seeing. So it's like I guess the atmosphere is like I guess yeah, there's like an atmosphere and like an awareness of like, oh, we're here to enjoy our time and enjoy this film or whatever.
Very interesting response. Thank you. The second question will be along those lines as well. What do you think of when the word cinematic pops into your head?
I started thinking of like higher production movies, thrillers or like action pack movies. I think that's what I think of cinematic because you would use like there's like cinematic effects, right? Right?
Yes.
Yeah, so like I start thinking of like I don't know, like the explosion or something like that, like I don't know, I'm thinking of like Fast and Furious or something. I don't know when like yeah, I don't know. That was the first thing that came to my mind. I don't know for some reason why, but I don't know. Like I started thinking of like, like big explosions or it's like waves or something like that crashing into like, I don't know, a building, something very dramatic cuz I think that's what usually like cinematic effects are kind of used for. I mean, I guess there's other like subtle ways that they're used, but I definitely think of like higher production quality movies, I would say.
Very interesting that when you think of cinematic, you think of, yeah, the actiony, big Michael Bay, 20 something, 2010s, 2012s, like big
Yeah,
explosions,
yeah.
basically.
Yeah, like
Interesting.
I guess like that just like a big boom in like production quality. 'Cause like sorry if I'm backtracking, but like cinema, I was thinking of like, like old school movies and stuff. Like I don't know, for some reason when I think of cinema, I think of like the 60s, 50s, 70s. But then when I think cinematic, I start thinking of like I don't know, like 2000s around there.
Wow. All right. I love those two responses. Now, third question. You're going to have to remind me. I'm sure you did. But you did watch the Chainsaw Man anime, correct? In the fall of 2022, right?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm about to laugh, but I was predicting this question, but thankfully I finished it. So yes, I did watch it fully.
I'm just going to offer a very basic question. What did you think about it?
I actually liked it. I think I liked some of the characters a lot. I don't know. I really grew to like one character in particular. Dude, I honestly forgot her name because oh my gosh, this is
Power?
no, wait, is that her name? I was thinking it's the girl that always cries a lot and she's like nervous all the time.
Oh my god, it's Kobeni. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one who like has like a mental
I don't know.
breakdown every like 5 minutes.
Yeah, I don't know why I like her. But yeah, I think if you're talking, I guess, about like the show, like the plot and stuff, I would definitely say, okay, first episode definitely had me hooked. But that's just because, I don't know, when you have anything like Pochita, the character itself, like, definitely hooked me in. Because, I don't know, just the bond between Pochita and Denji, I was just like, I dead ass cried. I was just like, damn. I don't know. I think it's so. I mean, I guess it's probably stupid that I cried, but the part where like sorry if I'm like rambling a bit, but the part where like Pochita was like show me your dreams or something like that to Denji, and then he just like yeah, or like I forget what it was. I don't remember it word for word, but um sorry, I kind of like went off topic there, but well, I guess that definitely hooked me in, but then like I guess getting to know like each of the characters and kind of seeing like their I guess I haven't seen much of like what's the word? I guess I haven't seen them fully like seen how their characters fully develop, but like just the beginning is kind of interesting. I also really liked I guess the fight scenes and stuff. That was pretty hype. I think it was pretty cool to see like how they portrayed the fight scenes like compared to like the manga and stuff.
Did you? So this is going to be question 4 now.
Oh, okay.
This is a work in progress, and this will be our last question. You said that the first episode made you cry. Now let's try to backtrack on when you first watched that episode. Personally, from my perspective, that first episode was meant to give you depression. It was very muted colors, very sad soundtracks, and a story that's pretty sad about a poor kid who's being harassed by the yakuza. Like, what was it? Just the combination of all these things that just really got you to start crying?
It wasn't like okay. I guess I should clarify. It wasn't like an intense cry, but I definitely teared up a little bit. Like had a few teardrops, but I would say yeah. I guess the beginning story, just like you see Denji and he's like his like background and stuff is kind of sad. Like, you kind of feel bad for him. Also, like I mean, sure, he's kind of funny in some aspects, but you can just tell he has a shitty life. And I guess I kind of felt, yeah, and I just kind of felt bad. I was just like, dang, that sucks, man. But then you like, I guess, combine like a companion with that. I guess I really empathized with the fact that he had like a companion that like, I guess, helped him through those tough times. I guess I was kind of connecting my own personal experiences. I mean, I have a dog, so I mean, I was just like, dang, like, yeah, like having like a little companion like that definitely like changes like your perspective and your mood and stuff. And the fact that like I guess well I don't know if it's a spoiler because it's the first episode, but the fact that he like lost his companion in a way kind of sad, and I was just like dang, that really hit.
This particular conversation harps on one essential element in all of Fujimoto's works: the theater. Throughout the various different works of Tatsuki Fujimoto, the setting of the theater is always consistently shown. While it's consistently shown, its importance varies across the different works. At times, it's referenced as a single panel for characters to be enjoying themselves in, or it can take a monumental role, such as showing the afterlife. I touched on the importance of the theater setting in an earlier video that focused on Goodbye Airi. So while I won't give you a repeat of what I said in that video, I think I can connect the major points to what Tsunami said. I highly recommend you watch that video since it does a pretty good job at explaining the movie theater and its disruption to the narrative. See, when I asked Tsunami about what she thinks of when the word cinema is brought up, she thought of the old retro drive-in movie theater. That theater, the setting, is a social area. But how could this be? When a movie starts, no one's on their phones, no one is talking or making idle chit-chat. It's just one singular viewing. That's where Fujimoto is able to emphasize the importance of the movie theater. Take the critical scene of Denji and Makima's date right after the Katana Man arc. After watching several movies that didn't really resonate with either of them, we get a full panel of Makima crying at a specific scene of two people hugging. I think my best real-life example is when Spider-Man got dusted in Avengers Infinity War. You can go to the reaction videos in theaters and clearly hear the audience either crying or audibly saddened at his death. While no words are straightforwardly said, the theater becomes a social area where everyone's raw emotions come up. We share this unitary pain in our hearts. Cinema is a social setting. Moving on to the next question, when asked about the meaning of cinematic, Tsunami repeated the same definition of what I recall Dag saying, the higher production value that's associated with big budget movies. Think Michael Bay explosions and shit. I think it's a fair statement to say that the Chainsaw Man anime had no other competitor in terms of overall animation quality. While the brief silly bits of CGI Devil did seem out of place, I still think it was the superior anime in terms of animation quality of the fall 2022 season. As we continue on with these interviews, we start to notice this pattern of cinematic equating to a higher budget. Moving on. We move on to our next interview. Lemon. Hi Lemon, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. It's such a pleasure to actually finally put a voice to the greatest power cosplayer that I've seen so far.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. So I've brought you here because I have about 2 to 3 questions that I'm going to be asking you. A little bit of an experiment. Is that fine?
Yeah, that's totally cool.
Perfect. Okay, so the first question that I have is, what do you think of when the word cinema pops in your head?
What I personally think of is, going to the movie theater on like a Saturday night with a bunch of friends, grabbing a big thing of popcorn and going and enjoying like this feature film on a big screen. Cinema can be seen as, a lot of different things, and I think that the most close to home version of cinema to me is that Saturday night feeling good, watching a really awesome picture on like that huge screen and getting that rush of sitting down in the seats and really taking in the experience.
Very interesting. I do like how your description is more along the physical lines, because nowadays you see online where some people say, oh, this feels like cinema, but they use it more of as a descriptor rather than a noun like you just did. So it's very interesting seeing how these definitions are going all over the place. Now, my second question, more focused on this topic. What do you think of when the word cinematic pops into your head?
Cinematic. Definitely a lot more, not necessarily cartoon, but the first thing that came up to my brain instantly was the Spider-Man Back to the Spider-Verse movie. I think of that as like a very cinematic interpretation of things, something that is intriguing and interesting, and it's something that you want to go and see on those big picture screens. It's something that captivates you, and it's something that's a story, and it's something that really brings in its watchers. That's what soul of cinematic is, at least in my interpretation.
So let's go back to that first point you just said. You said that when you think of cinematic, you almost got this. It reminded you of cartoons, and then you said Spider Verse. Can you explain on that a bit? So are you saying that cinematic is more cartoon, or is that just because it was the first thing that popped into your head?
Oh, that was the first thing that popped up into my
Okay,
head.
okay, fair.
Because it was like the first like ADHD thought that came to my brain, where I was like, when I think of like a cinematic movie that's really taking in, the storyline and the characters and going into depth and really, exploring throughout that storytelling narrative, that was the first kind of thing that you visually see everything that's kind of going. And you can see that in a lot of different movies. Like you can see that in the Marvel movies, you can see that in TV shows, but it's really just that cinematic aspect of going into depth through storytelling and being able to tell that story and relay it to the watchers in such a cool aspect that they'd go and watch it at a cinema.
Interesting. Now, okay, so cinematic, you also focus in on storytelling. So
Yes.
usually, from some of the individuals that I've spoken with, cinematic will be more focused in on the technical aspects, such as framing or pacing. But you've taken this route of more of the story. Can you explain a bit more on that? I really want to focus in on this.
Yeah, 100%. So I myself, I am an actress. I am a voice actress. I am a vocalist. A big part of my own personal life is that I am all into the storytelling. I'm a very theatrical person. So when I go and I see a movie, I'm not really focusing on the frame rate, or I'm not really focusing on the technical aspects of it, because we know that that's an incredibly important part of what makes a movie and what makes cinema, because that's the backbones of it. But I think that what really pulls me in personally through, what I believe is cinematic is that, being able to transport you into a different world and being able to put you into this different place while you're sitting in a seat. You're not thinking about, oh, well, what am I going to have for lunch tomorrow? As like, you know, but you're going there and you're like, wow, I feel that I'm like in this place, or at least I do, I feel like being able to captivate the audience and really pull them into this story is so important when it comes to cinema. Because if you were sitting and you were watching a boring movie and you were just not captivated by it, what's the point? At least in my perspective. It's we are given the opportunity to make these films and to act and to voice act and to do all these things to show a story and to bring people into this different space and into these wondrous worlds that come from our imagination. And I think that's really important and beautiful.
Beautiful answer. Thank you. It'll be great to use. And now for my final question, and I think you might see where I'm going with this. You did watch, well, of course, I mean, you cosplayed as one of the characters, but what did you think about the Chainsaw Man anime?
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I personally read the manga first. I was with a bunch of friends, and we actually ended up voice acting through the whole manga first. And I was kind of surprised with how far we got with the anime so far, which, being able to see it animated and being able to hear the actual voices of the characters is crazy. Because, it was just me and my like best online friends guessing about what they would sound like. And now we have a person to a voice. The people that made it really made it well and really did it justice, which I appreciate as a longtime reader and an appreciator and a lover of the series. I'm incredibly excited for what else they're going to do, especially with the other arcs. Yeah, I thought it was great. I know that there's always, things to talk about with, let's say, what if someone doesn't like the pacing? What if someone thinks that this was a little bit of a different, vocal way that they could have done things? But I think that with the way that they ended up doing it, I think it really started to tell the story, and I felt pulled back into the story the same way that I did when I was reading the manga. So I think that's a really important factor of it.
I'm considering whether I should play devil's advocate right now, but
Hmm.
I will, because that's what makes these interesting.
Right.
So you said that you felt like you were almost reliving the experience of reading the manga, and to be fair, a lot of individuals have been saying that online. Now, there's been a unfortunate vocal minority that is speaking on how the anime doesn't really capture the absurdity and the intensity, the grittiness of the manga. What do you think to those claims?
I think that's a completely fair claim. We've seen, or at least I have seen some crazy things in anime, and I don't think that Mappa necessarily took it as gruesome as it originally was, which I guess makes, part of it lose its super gritty, nasty charm that we love about it. When you're looking at a manga panel, a lot of it's really up to interpretation, and a lot of it's up to, what do we hear? What do we sense? What do we feel? What do we see with these characters on the page? And what do we think they're going through? And I guess Mappa's way of interpreting it was just a little less gruesome than people expected. Um, Not to say that that's entirely a bad thing. I do appreciate the gore and the gritty and the nasty because that's the charm of Chainsaw Man, and I do get that a lot. That makes a lot of sense. Like, if we were to look at Attack on Titan, what if it wasn't without bloodlusty titans? It would lose a lot of its charm. Like if when they animated that, they didn't keep that suspense and the craziness of it. So, that's a completely fair claim. I guess that I was just so incredibly excited that we were even getting an anime that I looked past it for the time being. But yeah, that makes complete sense why people feel that way.
As a preface for these next two interviews, I noticed a distinct pattern. So far with these earlier responses, we've noticed a location or a general aspect to the elements within a movie, such as framing or color choice or budget. These next two interviews in particular, I believe, capture the raw essence of what it means to be cinematic. Lemon's response to what cinema means focused on a mood, a vibe of watching movies. Cinema can be a physical location, a state of a movie, or simply a mood that the audience member feels on their day off. Cinema means an experience, a big picture feeling that seems to hark back to the feeling of a grandiose nature we touched on in a previous interview. However, what intrigued me more was Lemon's description of cinematic. To her, it means the bait, the lure that coaxes a watcher to go through the effort of buying a movie ticket and sitting down for a session. In essence, it is the soul. The soul within movies, and I swear I sound so coked out of my mind right now, but pay attention. But within movies, there's a general aim. To reach that aim, the directors and actors and animators work tirelessly to see their vision on the big screen. Think back to our dear friend Nakayama, who equally wanted to expose us to his own interpretation of Chainsaw Man. I know Lemon mentioned the Across the Spider-Verse movie that recently just came out, but likewise, I had this feeling when I watched the newest Puss in Boots movie. I couldn't help but feel that this movie in particular had been cared for to become a perfect product. I think it was also obvious to moviegoers as the discourse online was that Puss in Boots was a completely better movie than Avatar 2, which is a take I completely agree with. Anyway, back to my main point. Lemon believes that cinematic is the soul of a movie, and I want to focus on one specific point in this entire conversation, in which some audience goers don't really focus too much on the technical aspect of a movie, but rather its immersion. This is something I want to pinpoint on, as in an interview a while ago, we heard Tsunami saying that she felt sad in the first episode and how depressing Denji's pre-Chainsaw Man life was. Immersion, the manner in which emotions can be whisked out of a viewer, is key in a cinematic style of animation. Can that specific style immerse the viewer? I think it can, and I believe it has worked within this anime. Lastly, we come to our final interview, Lilac. Hi Lilac, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. This is the first time we're actually talking, so I've been going by and just picking out random strangers, and telling them, hey, what do you think about this show? So I'm very happy you're taking part in my experiment. Okay, so I have about 2 to 3 questions I want you to answer. They're fairly simple. Do you think you're up to it?
Oh, yeah, of course. I love the show, and the manga.
These first 2 questions are going to be a bit broad, but I think you'll be able to see where I'm going with this. So the first question I have is, what do you think of when the word cinema pops up in your head?
The word cinema?
Mm-hmm.
Well, typically I think of spectacle, action, or something plot-driven, something that is made to make the viewer feel something. Typically now these days it's very action-based. I think of something that is a spectacle in a sense that it grabs the viewer's attention and kind of tries to also tell a story at the same time.
Your definition is coming up towards the actual movie, not really the physical location. Some people call it cinema, let's go to the cinema. Just more of describing inwards into the movie itself, like you just said. My second question is, what do you think of when the word cinematic pops into your head?
Well, I definitely think, I said cinema was more the spectacle of it all. I think cinematic is... Sorry, could you repeat that?
Like, when you said a spectacle, I think of, grandiose, right? Like a big thing. I think that's what you're trying to say, right?
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah. And, it doesn't have to be action or combat. It can, be like a big romance plot or like a big plot reveal type deal or plot twist. But, when I think of cinematic, I think of more of kind of the story it's telling rather than the general broad thing, the general plot. I guess that's kind of hard to describe. While the other one is more to entertain, I think cinematic is more to explain or tell a story kind of deal. I guess they're both pretty similar in my mind.
Okay, can you expand a bit on, I know you just said it's a bit hard to describe. Do you think you can pinpoint a bit more on the cinematic aspect? You were saying more towards the story or a bit more focused on that.
Yeah, I think I can. I think I can. In my mind, also, when I think of story, I think of, everything has to start with a beginning and an end. And a cinematic is kind of the telling of that story. In my mind, when I sit down and I consume any kind of media, especially anime, a cinematic in my mind is just the telling of a story. Most of the time it's by a character through their lens or through their eyes, but here's the basic plot. We're going to take you through that plot beginning to hopefully end, and we're going to give you all the spices and flavors of the story, from character growth to antagonists to, those big plot twists, because, anime really likes to do those. And yeah, that's just kind of what I see as a cinematic is like the telling of a story from beginning to end, while also telling you those minute little things, because, again, like cinema, as they're kind of both derived from the same word, it's more of the telling of that spectacle rather than the whole overarching thing. It's telling a story and getting to know that story. And especially with good authors or good writers, you can really get to feel and sometimes even step into it. And it feels like you're watching something grand or, captivating, which I guess is the reasoning for cinema. If that makes any sense.
I really like that last portion of what you just described. I really like that last part, the telling of a story, but specifically in a certain frame, the way how the author wants to tell it. You just mentioned that. And now for our final and third question, what did you think about the Chainsaw Man anime adaptation?
Oh, well, when the trailer when it first got announced and it got that, I forget if it was a trailer or an announcement, way back, as someone that had read the manga in the early stages of COVID, I had grown really attached to the series, and I still actively keep up to date with part 2. So when the anime got announced, and especially when I saw the first episode, I was just thrilled. I think I sat and I watched that, the opener was just kind of like this unreal amount of like giddiness. I know a lot of people say it's a bit fast-paced, but it was interesting to see in anime format, especially with some of the arcs being like only 2 episodes long, which is unusual for most animes. I loved it. I think MAPPA did a great job with the animation. The voice acting was great. I'm personally more of a subtitle watcher. I prefer the Japanese dub, but I mean, even the English voices did great. I think Power's voice actor was incredible. And they captured a lot of scenes really well, and I think probably the highlight would have been the closing credits with all the different songs from different artists, with each one having different art styles. Because it was just fun to also see people pick apart and see the symbolism. And I think I think it was a great adaptation, and I'm honestly super excited for season 2.
2 things. Let's focus in on 2 things you just said. The first one, fast-paced. You said that some people assumed or they thought that this adaptation was a bit too fast-paced. What do you mean by that?
I'd seen some complaints from mutuals or just random people on the TikTok platform that just kind of said, oh, it's like you kind of blinked and, suddenly the arc with Katana Man was suddenly over. And I think it's just Chainsaw Man. Bit of a hypocrite. I do think it's a little fast-paced, the manga itself, but I think the way they paced the anime was great. Nothing really needed to be added. The fight scenes were great, but they just didn't last as long as some other anime arcs may be, where, sometimes you get 2 arcs in 1 season type deal, while Chainsaw Man had, I think, like, maybe 4? I can't recall off the top of my head, but it was a bit. They covered a good chunk of the manga. So, but I think they did brilliantly with the pacing. So yeah, that was one only complaint, and that actually came more from manga readers than it did from anime onlys. Just because, again, it's a different type of experience when you're reading something and you're watching something. But I mean, yeah, again, despite the fast pacing, I think it was really great, despite some people's complaints about it.
Let's focus on a second thing that you also mentioned. You thought the animation was great. I agree. I think that there's pretty interesting shots. I think you've probably seen this complaint, as it was one of probably the most major complaint throughout the debut of Chainsaw Man. What did you think about the CGI heads, CGI devils? Because clearly some people were upset with, Denji's chainsaw head looking kind of weird, Katana Man looking kind of weird, the Cursed Devil looking kind of weird. What did you think about that?
To be honest, I was a bit nervous when I heard about the CGI. Compared to other shows, that it wasn't awful, but, Attack on Titan, I remember when it first initially switched to CGI, some people were like, "Arr." So I was a bit nervous. I thought the CGI wasn't awful. It was really skillfully done, and it didn't stand out, and I think that's what I appreciated it the most, was it didn't feel like a sore thumb while also having, like, the 2D backgrounds and such. And I feel like probably the 3D was probably the best route to go, especially with the hybrids, with Denji especially, just because that would have taken a lot more time, and I would feel very awful for those animators. And I don't know, it just gives it a more, as it's intended to, a more realistic look. Yeah, and I guess that's the only thing I can quite say on that, is I personally didn't mind the 3D animation. And as more 3D animation is being adapted into more anime and such, I think Chainsaw Man did a great job with it. And I felt like it was probably necessary to do with a few of those scenes, because the anime isn't exactly, the manga isn't exactly simple. It's a bit jam-packed, lots of details.
For this final interview, I would like for you to reflect on those previous interviews and the weight of one's meaning. The questions that I presented to these 5 individuals isn't by any means an easy one. When was the last time you were confronted with the elements of a movie and taking it apart to understand its ingredients? What gravitates me so much to Lilac's response is how similar it sounds like to entering a cake shop. Indulge me for a quick second. I came to this conclusion after analyzing Lilac's response to how cinema and cinematic are almost the same word. The two are blended together, as you may have noticed in earlier interviews, and how some definitions actually fit for the other word. I put it like this. Cinema is the physical cake, a delicacy, the first image of what we see when we enter the cake store. We see its frosting, the colors, and only come to imagine the following flavors hidden within. Cinematic is instead the components of the cake, the specifics such as the taste or density. I think one of the larger points is that Lilac is correct in stating that cinema and cinematic are derived from the same word and are not mutually exclusive but overlapping. Cinema is how we see the cake. I assume that the in-world translation would be the trailer of the movie. The uniqueness and how much we resonate with the movie are what gravitates us to buying a ticket. Cinematic is the taste, how it's delivered, and whether we are left satisfied with the final product. As per Lilac's own words, the telling of a story. Chainsaw Man in many ways reflected the cake metaphor. I remember when the trailer came out, this mishmash of daunting soundtracks and a style of animation that felt next level. It was breathtaking, and motivated us to eat the final product in the fall of 2022. Now, whether some were left satisfied or not is another question, but it's undeniable that Chainsaw Man certainly made a mark on the community, even up to this present day. I think in particular this interview made me come to an important realization. Coming up with meanings for cinema and cinematic are foreign concepts that are wildly difficult to put into words. They're hard questions to ask because of the broad range of interpretations. Do you remember what the purpose of this section was to begin with? It was exactly this same point. I was afraid that by putting a description or meaning to a specific word by myself, that I would be open to failing to capture a full meaning, of these 2 words in particular. Now with these 5 interpretations, I can get a bit closer to coming up with a universal interpretation, or at least finding common elements that can match together. All for it to come together and use as my argument for why Chainsaw Man is cinematic. Now that we've finished all 5 interviews, let's make a brief summary of the testimony we've received and concoct one singular interpretation of what cinematic means. Let's take a look at the interview number 1. Dak stated that cinematic meant a mixed bag of observable elements such as framing. However, he did state that cinematic captures the essence of storytelling. Therefore, we can say that cinematic means the storytelling within a narrative and how well it's executed. In interview number 2, Water gave 2 different interpretations of cinematic, being the grand atmosphere of a scene and an in-game cutscene. Now, I'll push aside the game cutscenes as I feel that's not really relevant to the definition, but also that the interpretation of grand atmosphere captures that concept. This grandiose event that makes us drop our jaws is an element that elevates our viewing to recognize we're watching something truly unique. In interview number 3, we detect another similarity as Tsunami describes cinematic as this higher budget, clearly higher level of production value. It's what separates a standard show one would watch on a Saturday morning or what we would see to these bombastic events on the big screen that have more money thrown at it. Interview 4 had Lemon give a name to the previous descriptions. In essence, cinematic is to capture the soul of a movie. After a movie has taken in a higher budget and utilizes that grand atmosphere that separates it from the rest of the pack, we get closer to finding the soul of the movie and beneath it the passion of the creators. There is a vision that means to entangle us as we are continuously immersed. Finally, interview 5 connects the final piece as we loop back to the very beginning, as Lilac states that cinematic is the way in which a story is told. Utilizing these 5 different keys of information, we can come to one fluid but more accurate answer of what cinematic means. Cinematic is the way in which a production team is able to utilize filmmaking techniques to tell the narrative of a story through grandiose scenes of entertainment in order to display the passion of their work to an immersed audience. Maybe this definition won't suit you, but it does to me. I feel like this is the pulse of what many audience goers feel what cinematic is, even if they don't have the words to properly form a definition. At this point in the video, we have recovered not only testimony from the director of the Chainsaw Man anime, but also those who have watched it. This working interpretation of what cinematic means won't be perfect by any measure, but I still want to give it a go and try to use it when analyzing Chainsaw Man. Section 4 in particular is where the bulk of this video will lie upon, within the reasoning. Section 4 is composed of various subsections, all dealing with either the Chainsaw Man manga or Chainsaw Man anime. This will be our running schedule, as I think each one of these topics does deserve a place within the conversation, and you'll find how this entire cinematic style of adaptation does bleed its way into these very smaller subsections. The first subsection will be focused on whether Chainsaw Man the manga is cinematic. The second subsection will be focused on the first anime episode of Chainsaw Man, which I think does an excellent job at showcasing what cinematic is. The third subsection will be focused on music selection within the Chainsaw Man anime. The fourth subsection will focus on mimicking the absurdity of the Chainsaw Man manga into the anime. The fifth subsection is adaptational choices, where we will particularly focus on the Muscle Devil. Finally, our last subsection will be focused on applying our working definition of cinematic to the Chainsaw Man anime and whether it was the correct choice too, as we'll take a specific focus on pacing and tone, something we've been doing throughout this video. I had no idea that this video would grow to this size, but I'm honestly really happy about it. Throughout the making of this video, I've met just so many wonderful people. If anything, it's the love of Chainsaw Man that emboldens us to tackle these serious questions. I mean, at the end of the day, this is just a piece of fiction, but it's a piece of fiction I love very dearly. Now then, with all that's said and done, we can move on to section 4, starting off with the subsection 1. Is Chainsaw Man the manga cinematic? Is Chainsaw Man the manga cinematic? Oh yes, extremely so. What, did you think that cinematic scenes were only within animated or live-action movies or TV shows? If you've read Fujimoto's works before, then you'll notice when he really gets you, that unexplainable feeling of failing to produce words out of your mouth and instead just staring in awe or bursting out in laughter at the mess he's drawn before your very eyes. It's unbelievable how good he is at detailing beautifully drawn scenes. Let's take a look at some examples before pinpointing the cinematic nature of Chainsaw Man. Two of Fujimoto's greater known one-shots are Look Back and Goodbye Eri. I think it's on sale now. It's supposed to go on sale this June. Pick up your copy. These two are titanic titles that are absolute must-reads if one considers themselves to be Fujimoto fans. Look Back is a coming-of-age story for two young women who become skilled manga artists. I've done a separate video on the nature of preserving and blossoming relationships within Look Back and highly recommend one read it when confronted with writer's block. Back to the main point, the main character Fujino is a talented artist for the school newspaper until she meets her rival. This spurs on a metaphorical arms race to see who is more capable of improving their art. There's a specific panel of Fujino as a child when she's dancing in the rain. This scene not only brings in her struggle as an artist to improve, but shows the melancholic nature of our reality. This scene of Fujino dancing transcends the content of the entire manga because of how beautiful it is. A young girl allowing herself to express her emotions in the rain means a symbolic rebirth. It's a beautiful panel. This is a scene I could easily see in any movie and be taken aback by the raw nature of both the environment and the character. The next panel I want us to focus on is the final panel of Goodbye Eri, a gut-wrenching story that plays with the reader's understanding of a cohesive narrative. Towards the end of this specific story, Yuta frees himself from the death of a girl he loved by blowing her up after it turns out she was a vampire? This specific panel of an adult Yuta literally blowing up the building behind me reminds me of what Tsunami had said earlier, that Michael Bay-esque effects like big explosions. I remember finishing this exact one-shot and bursting out loud in laughter because of how morbidly funny the entire story was, and I'm pretty sure Fujimoto aims for these reactions. If anything, the explosion panel is Goodbye Eri could definitely be created on the big screen. I could mention literally dozens of other shots within Fujimoto's other earlier works, but his two full-page panels are particularly known for these larger-than-life grandiose scenes playing before you. In particular, there's in part 2 recently, when Denji and Asa were running on the motorcycle away from falling buildings. That is a movie right there. So now that we've covered those, let's focus on cinematic panels within Chainsaw Man. I think my automatic go-to is the Denji and Rize kiss. The Bomb Girl arc, which will be animated next in Season 2, presumably is pretty short. It really consists of a major date and a major fight. There is a specific point where Rize rizzes up Denji at the pool and manages to sneak in a kiss. The panel is gorgeous as these two lovebirds are smooching and the fireworks are going off behind them. It honestly looks like a traditional confession scene, only for it to be abruptly ended by having Rize bite off Denji's tongue. Another cinematic scene I can recall is the arrival of the Darkness Devil during the International Assassins arc. At this point, Japan is under siege by some of the most dangerous devil hunters whose purpose is to hunt down Chainsaw Man. In an effort to deliver a critical blow, the Darkness Devil is summoned, and his entrance is probably the most bone-chilling manga scenes I think I've ever read. That panel encapsulates dread, a factor far gone in current-day horror movies that all just dish out corny jump scares. I could easily see that same energy within this panel translated over to a current-day horror movie. It's frightening. It's an event that you know is dire and establishes the fragility of our characters, all within seconds of his arrival. Fujimoto is a fan of cinema. He knows that there needs to be soul poured into his drawings so that his audience can evoke that same feeling he has when he comes up with these characters and events. As the final example to these cinematic panels would have to be the unfortunate death of Power, in the last moments before the grand finale. Of course, there are various runners-up, but it's this specific frame of Makima and Denji walking forward to a doorbell ringing that constricts the viewer. You can feel your heart choking your throat as you know that doors are associated with unpleasant memories. Although the panels show static drawings, you can feel the two characters walking forward and seeing an entire full picture as Makima shreds Power's body into nothingness. As Martin Scorsese says, "This is cinema. It's larger than life, and it's jaw-dropping." Fujimoto consistently keeps you on your toes with events no one can predict at times. The Power death scene is traumatic, particularly because we can fill in the margins between pages and panels. Not only is execution important, but the wind-up, the margins in Fujimoto's writing leave so much to the imagination. It's probably one of the main reasons readers subconsciously enjoy the manga because it allows us to take the driver's seat and set the pacing and animation in between to our own personal liking. I want you to reflect on what I just said and take a look at the different full panel shots within Chainsaw Man. Could you imagine them as a fluid scene on a big budget movie? I think my answer is a definitive yes. Fujimoto's love for cinema is on full display as he makes these large-scale sequences that take up the full page so that he can try and mimic the nature of bombastic scenes of real-life movies. One of the main criticisms of the Chainsaw Man anime is that it didn't feel like the manga, as if there was a complete divide in experience. We know that this complaint may be warranted, seeing as how Nakayama aimed for a more cinematic style of adaptation. But what exactly is it that shifted the experience from enjoyment to displeasure? From our previous topic, we know that an artist can draw manga in a specific style to present these grandiose images to attract readers. Many feel that the soul of a panel is lost in adaptation. So let's compare the first chapter of Chainsaw Man with the first episode of the anime. But before we do this, I want to hit on another parallel topic that is warranted as a comparison. I feel I'm more than qualified to talk about this specific section because of my love for Hell's Paradise. Hell's Paradise has recently, at the time of this recording, finished its first season. I was covering every episode weekly until I gave up around the last final episodes. There's a reason for this. You see, Hell's Paradise the manga runs circles around the anime. It's no surprise that in this current season, Studio Mappa has decided to source out all resources towards Vinland Saga. So the end result is a Hell's Paradise anime where the first 2 episodes and the last 2 episodes of the season clearly look like they were given more attention. But the center filler is not really that great and kinda laughable. The reason why many were dissatisfied is that the Hell's Paradise manga has this inherent grittiness in every fight scene. Every interaction one of the prisoners have with the island is heightened because of the style of drawing that the author employs. Some scenes are just so poorly animated it would bring shame to any fan of Hell's Paradise. While for Chainsaw Man, Mappa fully allocated their resources to the production, so regardless of grittiness or not, every scene looked beautifully made. But still, the lack of grittiness, the lack of violence is present and isn't mimicked. I understand an anime doesn't have to follow the manga strictly. I'm not a fool, believe me. But it does play a role in why some may feel the anime to be different. Let's look at the first chapter of Chainsaw Man. It's quite a short narrative, one that's filled with sadness and melancholy as we see Denji's life trapped in a prison within the Yakuza. Tonally speaking, the anime and manga do diverge. At the very least, elements are heightened. The manga in many ways feels more hopeful, I would say because of the lack of music or color. It's a bizarre story that has a great payoff full of revenge for Puchita's death. There's a specific panel that shows Denji just absolutely ripping into the zombie devil. The fervor that Denji holds when fighting against the zombie grunts makes the reader really stare into the eyes of a grisly monster of what the Chainsaw Man devil really is. I feel like this specific element of grittiness was gone in the anime. I think in part one of the main reasons was because of how jarring Denji's Chainsaw Man form looked. Now, it ain't no Flash CGI levels of bad, I'll admit that much, but he just looks so out of place that it ruined my immersion. But besides that point in particular, there was another thing going on. The episode was specifically created to make you feel sad. Tsunami's interview hit this point briefly, in which this first episode could easily make others cry, or at the very least tear up. The music throughout the first episode is so somber, the color choices I believe were specifically chosen to show how depressing Denji's life is. These bleak gray and blues are mimicking Denji's worldview in that his life pre-Chainsaw Man is fucking horrible. I think Nakayama did an excellent job on a directional level when choosing these specific elements. This first episode felt so impactful, almost like watching a movie. I can say for certainty that this first episode's animation and just level of intensity was unable to be matched by any other anime in this season. That is, until CGI Man kept taking up the screen. But from here, there's one more cinematic element that I would like to focus on. The pacing. I mentioned it already, but the pacing between the manga and anime are completely different. The anime is a standard 22-ish minutes of watch time that you're forced to follow. I don't mean that in a negative way, but more so in a way to explain the accuracy when watching anime. You need to watch the director's vision in full. Meanwhile, reading the first chapter of the Chainsaw Man manga would probably take someone between 6 to 8 minutes to read. See, these differences in pacing may be another reason why some dislike the anime. It could feel too slow for some and lose the fast-paced tension within the action of the first chapter. This particular shot of Denji walking through the corpses as some sort of predator is so impactful and shows you his transition to becoming more of a devilman. I think the anime did what it could with what it was given. I do believe that there's also another issue at play. Chainsaws don't cut like swords, they rip and tear. In some of the panels it looks like Denji's slicing off heads, but the truth is if you want to be accurate to literal chainsaws, then you need to show how they actually work. They need time before completely cutting through something. I've said it before, but I'm a sucker for music. I pay too much attention to music at times, and that could be one of the main reasons why I found the first episode more depressing than normal. I believe that music actually worked against one specific scene in the first few episodes of the Chainsaw Man anime. I believe the original tone of the scene shifted and could have been interpreted differently by an audience. Maybe I'm going a bit tinfoily on this one, but hear me out. It's after Denji joins the Devil Hunters and is paired up with Power that we learn about her unfortunate catnapping incident. Power offers a squeeze of her breasts if Denji is able to rescue Maui from the Bat Devil. At this point, we know that Denji really wants to feel up on a woman's melons since he hasn't had any female touch for the better part of his life. Denji, under the guise of acting heroic, is merely attempting this crusade to feel up some tits, while Power is just slow-minded and is in shock that he has taken the role of rescuing her beloved cat. In the manga, this scene is one of the best jokes in the entire series. We clearly see through Denji's facade and know that he's just acting like a horny monkey. It's pretty straightforward. However, in the anime, there's a specific music choice used when Denji states his wish to save Meowie. This, how can I put it? This guitar bass, this rock and roll soundtrack playing in the background transforms this scene from a comical one to a more serious one. I felt like this scene in particular reminded me of a traditional shonen scene where the main character states their mission or their goal while an epic OST is blaring in the background. It's almost like the scene wanted itself to be taken seriously by the watcher, something that the manga clearly was avoiding and wanted to come across as a joke by horrible motivation. A scene where this more cinematic musical choice was excellent was when Makima used her abilities to execute the squad that had kidnapped Denji after being defeated by Katana Man. This dread, these heavy drums and chimes that continue to vibrate throughout every horrid death amplifies the scene as establishing Makima as the superior predator among the Devil Hunters. It went as far as to even include a Bocchi edit where Makima wipes out the poor little pink blob. I think the musical choice for this anime was a bit all over the place. I'm not saying that the music itself was bad, far from it. I just feel like there were certain song choices that really shouldn't have been placed there. These song choices, while great, can change the tone of a scene in a negative or positive light, and it's within this tonal change we find dissatisfaction from some Chainsaw Man viewers who believe the core of Chainsaw Man, the manga, was missing. You would probably expect me to now talk about the 12 unique endings, right? Well, to be completely honest with you, I feel like they're just not relevant. Sure, they can add details, but they're not part of the story. They're just like the cherry on top. Which really sucks to say because Nakayama seems to have placed a huge importance on the different ending soundtracks. I just feel like they play no role in this discussion of cinematic, and even when the majority of them weren't particularly memorable. Mimicking absurdity from the source material is hard. It's undeniable. The way I see it, by trying to explain what happens in between the margins of Fujimoto's works, is like asking the magician to explain his secrets. Margins are important because it allows for our imagination to put two and two together. The rush, the crazy fights within the first season of Chainsaw Man didn't really remind me of the manga. These two works were separate entities in how they portrayed the fights. While sure, it's the same actions being taken, the anime just had a more cinematic style that made fights more serious than they were. The Katana Man fight versus Aki is one clear example of this, where I felt like the manga showed a more fluid movement in the drawings than the actual anime. If anything, one of the fights that most closely resembled its manga counterpart would probably have to be the fight between Denji and the Eternity Devil. Your surroundings are just walls of flesh as Denji focuses on cutting and tearing through the devil as the days pass by. After I interviewed Water, I mentioned to her some of my qualms, and she made this brilliant connection. Many anime viewers expected to feel that same craziness and fast-paced action that the manga's known for. My question is it possible to replicate that in an anime setting? What if I told you it is? You see, a few years back, Studio Bones produced a little-known anime called Kekai Sensen, or its English name, Blood Battle Blockade. This was probably one of my first anime I ever remember watching, and still to this day, the way Bones was able to weave the music, animation, voice actors all together to make this statue of perfection. While I won't post the full clip of the specific fight here due to copyright reasons, I implore all of you to watch this specific scene where Zap Renfro showcases his abilities. It captures that same zany soul that I felt Chainsaw Man the manga had. The Katana Man and Aki fight feels more like a struggle. Nakayama himself stated that he felt like there's more to a fight scene than just the heavy hitting. He said that the importance of the character's state is critical, like how they look like when they're fighting or even when they're running or doing non-aggressive actions. That's why some might feel that the Aki and Katana Man fight feels slower. Kekai Sensen is able to have its slice of cake and eat it too, by utilizing that fast-paced nature to keep us on the edge of our seats. While you could say that the fight between Aki and Katana Man feels more cinematic, Kekai Sensen, while looking like a standard anime, just has so much more passion. I believe Kekai Sensen wins this round. Which opens up another point. While I do understand Nakayama's point of view in wanting to make a cinematic-styled adaptation, it wasn't necessary. He wanted the Chainsaw Man anime to not look like how other anime look like. But if Kekai Sensen has shown us anything, it's that an anime can deliver jaw-dropping scenes regardless of style. This section in particular is more of a personal grievance of mine, but all the more reason to mention it as I believe it's important. The Muscle Devil's exclusion from the anime angered many. Many were left wondering where these few pages had disappeared to, and this sparked an intense debate on whether Nakayama was correct in removing the Muscle Devil's appearance. This debate has many arguments on each side, who either argue for its importance or are satisfied with its removal. I think Nakayama purposefully removed the Muscle Devil scene because it wouldn't match the tone of the show. In particular, the Muscle Devil is quite silly, as it's just another event for Denji to realize that he shouldn't really trust appearances. Now I'm going to assume that all of you have read the manga, and will follow along with the beats of this particular short story. The Muscle Devil's true role was incredibly on the nose, as the whole point was to show that appearances can be distrusting. Example, Makima, the big bad of part 1, who at the time of the event was just starting to get Denji on his leash. In the manga, Denji is forced to kill the Muscle Devil per Makima's orders, but while he's off chasing it down, he realizes that Makima is just using him. Hell, to the reader, it's a huge red flag to us that Makima has a mean streak in her. It establishes that she's dangerous and shouldn't be trusted. Throughout the Katana Man arc, we don't really get any overt feelings of Makima being a dangerous enemy. The closest we come to is when Makima decides to wipe out the Katana Man kidnapping squad, but you can make an argument she was justified in eliminating them in the specific gruesome way, considering the world is full of devils who may be hard to kill. While we realize that she's powerful, nothing will make us suspect that she's evil by any means. That's why the Muscle Devil's inclusion, I felt, was too on the nose in telling us that she's a villain. The problem is that Denji's realization that she is kinda dangerous leads him to establish his own free conscience. The anime, even the opening, make it seem like he's only interested in tits, when that's far from the case. Sure, on the surface, Denji may seem like a raging sex addict, but beneath it, there's this complexity associated with a boy trying to figure out what he wants from the people around him. The Muscle Devil arc, and I say that with a lot of parentheses, gives us something at the cost of maybe spoiling a potential character turning evil in the future. I think the Muscle Devil's exclusion was fine for the enjoyment of the anime watchers. I think it's an important scene, but considering that what Nakayama is trying to go for, a more serious adaptation of Chainsaw Man, then I can see why it was put on the chopping block. Also, ready to get your minds blown? In part 2 of Chainsaw Man, when Denji is fighting against the Falling Devil in order to avoid any psychological attacks, Denji cuts up his brain to stop thinking and screams out different foods he likes. One of them was corn dogs. Guess what, you guys? Your world is about to be turned upside down. Makima is eating a corn dog when Denji defeats the Muscle Devil, meaning Denji probably associates corn dogs with Makima since she's so hot. Look at what they took away from us. Don't let Nakayama get away with this. Make sure he gets removed, is what my alter ego would say. This is where we tackle the behemoth of a question. Is Chainsaw Man 2022 cinematic? As a refresher, cinematic is the way in which a production team is able to utilize filmmaking techniques to tell the narrative of a story through grandiose scenes of entertainment in order to display the passion of their work to an immersed audience. God, that's a mouthful. I think Nakayama was able to create a beautiful anime. It's undeniable that Chainsaw Man the anime is a higher level production. Till this day, it's pretty hard to find an anime that was made with so much writing on its back. The issue here is that because Chainsaw Man the manga is such a monolith in the anime community, we're practically begging for a portion of us to be let down regardless of what MAPPA was able to produce. The reality of the situation is that I expected some naysayers, but to see such a large support against the Chainsaw Man anime, or at least a higher level of dissatisfaction, certainly shocked me. From its melancholic shots to its attention to detail with certain characters' physical actions, Chainsaw Man was animated within a unique lens. But now we come across the secret argument that's been boiling in the back burner. Is the Chainsaw Man anime bad? I think that it's particularly because of the fact that it's an adaptation of one of the most popular mangas that made it open to various attacks. The truth is, I feel like several scenes just didn't feel Chainsaw Man-y. Instead, they were more focused to fit the tone and scope of what Nakayama wanted to adapt. That entire style over substance argument may feel like has happened here. The vision Nakayama set out to animate was what we got, and it wasn't really that bad. There's a reason why Jujutsu Kaisen and Attack on Titan were able to establish a larger impact in the anime medium. One could say that it's because the adaptation wasn't so seriously scoped and cinematic, but rather blended into the silliness that we associate most anime with. I know I can't stop repeating myself with Jujutsu Kaisen, but it's such a fun show to watch, whereas the Chainsaw Man anime didn't feel as fun and in many times made me feel pretty sad. This brings me to another point, one I didn't want to mention until now because of its importance. If you really want to experience Chainsaw Man at its closest form to what it could be in the manga in terms of the dialogue, then I highly suggest you learn Spanish and listen to the dubbed Spanish version of Chainsaw Man. Holy shit. The Spanish dubbing for Chainsaw Man does not deserve to be as good as it is. The little nuances and the added insults between Denji and Power and the ridiculous moaning that she can't hold herself back from is priceless. Even looping back to the music subsection I was talking about earlier, when I listened to the Spanish version of Denji's commitment to Miaui, the soundtrack was ignored because of Power's loud Spanish moaning. Almost like if the scene turned into the manga as a joke. So first it went joke, serious, but back to joke because of her constant moaning. The Spanish dubbing has this chokehold over me, and I'm thankful for the fact that I'm bilingual. The English dubbing just didn't resonate as much with me. And, well, I don't really have an opinion on the Japanese dubbing because, well, I don't know what it sounds like to the average Japanese citizen. Regardless, Spanish W. I just think that as an adaptation, the anime isn't really able to come across and capture what makes the manga so special. So as an adaptation, it doesn't work as it could be. That being said, the anime in its own right is superior to more than half the anime that are currently out right now in terms of production value. So why isn't it that the Chainsaw Man anime is as good as the manga? Because of the tone and pacing. As we've been going through this entire video, we've really focused in on the differences that the anime and manga have. Tonally, I think it was a mistake to take these more serious cinematic approaches. It's completely fine to enjoy the inherent wackiness of the anime medium and relish in what you have at your disposal. The pacing, as I mentioned earlier, is like a magician explaining how his tricks work. His secret, the margins, are key to this point, as when the anime goes and explains what you've already thought of in your head as the magic is sapped away. As an adaptation, it didn't reach what I think it could have been if Nakayama didn't have such a specific scope in mind. It's really unfortunate because I feel like there was this fun comedy. I mean, there is comedy always with whenever Power opens her mouth, but it's just missing from the anime for me. I feel like it really focuses on that cinematic, depressing style, that more serious style. And as a fan, it really sucks to hear. But, you know, Sometimes you get what you want, sometimes you don't. And that's fine, because this was Nakayama's view. I hope that in this video I was able to teach you something, or at least entertain you. This video has been a growing blob as I continue to find more and more avenues in which to talk about in this final product. The cinematic style that Chainsaw Man delivered was fine. It left a light imprint on the community. We know that the manga's intensity cannot be replicated on screen, at least currently. In some ways, it kind of reminds me of Berserk, but these anime adaptations don't even have the budget that a powerhouse like MAPPA has, to be completely honest. I would have hoped that Nakayama could animate the Bomb Girl arc because I fully believe he would have had a great time in adapting it. It's very slice of life-ish, and the story doesn't really focus too much on the action, at least towards the end. His cinematic style is used properly when characters interact with each other through dialogue or anything that's just not physical fighting. The various shots of a romantic date and confrontations within the Bomb Girl arc would be done excellently, but for now, I guess we're going to have to wait and see how MAPPA decides to move forward with the anime. With all that being said and done, I am now finished with this video. One major side note, the first being, thank you, all of you, for getting me over 100 subscribers. I didn't really make a video to celebrate, as some do, but I feel very humbled that there are people out there listening to me. So as my formal statement, thank you for having my back. I'll try to be on top of making more videos, as this specific one took me about 3 months to make. I've had various other different videos I've wanted to make, but it's just this caught my attention, and I wanted to capture the time crunch at least before a second season gets confirmed. Yeah, it was on the back burner for a while. Anyway, with all that being said and done, I hope you all have a great day. Take care.